Hey, welcome to Magnet Psychology. It's Chapter 12, Time for Adulthood. Section 1, at adulthood, young adulthood is characterized by becoming independent from parental authority and trying new ways of doing things. Many young adults will form lasting relationships and marry. Although most young couples marry because they are in love, many marriages in the United States end in divorce. Today, the average age for men to get married is 29.8 years old, and for women, it's 27.8. During young adulthood, most men and women become independent, they begin their careers, they develop meaningful relationships. What are some of the characteristics and goals of young adulthood, and why are marriage relationships important parts of young adulthood? And how did divorce affect parents and children? These are the questions you should be able to answer upon completion of this section. Young adulthood is characterized by a desire to try new things and changing relationships with parents. Once young adults reach their 30s, they often reevaluate their decisions and have made about the course of their life. Reassessment may bring major life changes. Settling down, the mid to late 30s are often characterized by settling down or planting roots. And so that would fit with getting married at these days. The developmental task of a young adulthood is, according to Erik Erikson, exploring your adult roles, becoming independent, developing intimate relationships, and adjusting to living with another person, starting a family and becoming a parent. And often when you start living with another person, you end up living with a bunch of people because you have children. Assuming responsibilities of managing a home, beginning of a career or a job, and assuming some responsibilities in larger community, for example, participating in local government or religious organizations, creating a social network of friends and coworkers. Development of identity, who you are and what you stand for, is an important part of adolescence and young adulthood. History of marriage. In most Western societies, the patriarchy has dominated marriage, but now spouses are more likely to be viewed as equal partners. The concept of marrying for love emerged in the 1800s. Today, companionship and intimacy are central to marriage. Choosing spouses. Today, young Americans typically select their own spouses. Influences over the choice include ethnicity, level of education, social class, religion, and similarity in age, values, and attitudes. Marriage practices over time. Throughout history, marriage has changed according to the needs of the people and society. The only thing that hasn't changed is the idea of marriage as a bond between two people. In the Kingdom of Israel, according to the Hebrew Bible, a man was required to marry his deceased brother's widow if he died without a son. In ancient Greece, girls in ancient Greece often married around the age of 15. Men married around the age of 30 after fulfilling their military service. In India, arranged marriages in India have been practiced for centuries. Today, parents may still choose a child's spouse, usually without the child's consent. With the child's consent. Medieval Europe, marriages among nobility arranged to secure wealth and power in the 12th century. However, troubadours tended to glamorize the idea of courtly love. Pre-Civil War, a marriage ceremony between enslaved Americans often involved the ritual of stepping over a broomstick while friends and family watched. Of course, marriage did not prevent the slave owners from destroying the families, but it was something. In Sudan, many people still observe the tradition of having a groom's family pay for the bride's hand in marriage with cattle. This is known as a dowry, typically. In Korea, a traditional Korean marriage represents the union of two families rather than joining of two individuals. Today, many try to keep such traditions alive. Okay, why isn't it going? There we go. Reasons for divorce. One reason for divorce is a common occurrence is because obtaining a divorce is easier than it used to be. People may divorce due to spousal abuse, child abuse, infidelity, stress, or inability to communicate. In fact, there was a time where a woman was not allowed to ask for a divorce. Only the man could ask for a divorce. And the only way typically a woman could ask for divorce is if one of these characteristics. And obviously, child abuse and spousal abuse, nobody wants to be accused of that. And nobody wants to be accused of infidelity, especially if you're really fooling around with somebody you're not supposed to. So it used to be the tradition would be go out, find a prostitute, and hire her to be the person that you would name in the divorce lawsuit so that you could get divorced. Or him, I guess could be the case. Financial resources are usually divided in divorce. The comedian Eddie Murphy used to always make a joke back when he was single that he was doing really well, and that the thing that he would never do was get married, because once you get married, she gets half. And that was his running joke, was half. Divorced mothers often have primary responsibility for children. Divorced fathers often have to pay child support and alimony. Most divorced people recover and the majority remarry. Children of divorce. Divorce can be difficult for children no matter what their age. Children of divorced people are more likely to have behavioral problems, engage in substance abuse, and earn lower grades in school. Boys often have greater problems than girls to adjusting to divorce. Psychologists usually advise parents who are getting divorced to, 1, try to agree on how they'll interact with the children, and this is usually a huge problem. 2, help each other maintain a good parent-child relationship. And 3, avoid criticizing others in front of the criticizing each other in front of the children. And oftentimes this is very difficult for parents to accomplish, but this is the most successful strategy if they do these things. The financial impact of divorce is really quite interesting. What happens in the financial impact of a divorce and the consequences for women are much more severe than they are for men. 14% of an income decline for women who remain single after divorce. After negative 3% average decline in per capita income experienced by women who remarry after divorce. So women have an economic impact either way. 80% increase in your per capita income for men who stay single after divorce. So for men to stay single, it's actually a big plus for them. And 40% average increase per capita experience for men who remarry after divorce. So as you can see, for men, it's a much more beneficial situation. Section 2, we're going to talk about middle adulthood. Middle adulthood is one of the greatest challenges facing middle-aged adults, is retaining the ability to create, originate, and produce. During middle adulthood, many adults go through a period of reassessment and reevaluate what to do with the rest of their lives. Many middle-aged adults have to adjust to the changing needs of their children and deal with their own physical changes. So in this section, the main idea is, during middle adulthood, men and women continue to be creative in their careers and family and community. They also face new challenges and changes in life as they grow older. So you should be able to answer the following questions at the completion of this section. What is generativity? Why do many adults experience a midlife transition? And what life changes do people face in middle adulthood? Generativity, middle adulthood spans from the years 40 to 65. Hey, that's me. I'm right in the middle. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm towards the end. I'm 60. Eric Erickson said that the greatest challenge facing middle adults is generativity. It's the ability to create, originate, and produce. Generativity adds meaning to the lives of adults and helps them to maintain and enhance their self-esteem. Eric Erickson believed that the adults who are not generative can become stagnant. And so it's an important period. Generative. Okay, how can adults maintain their generativity? Adults can maintain generativity by creating, originating, producing. Specific examples might include improving methods, relationships in the workplace, guiding younger people, voting, and community service. So this is why most of the people you see in many of those adult groups like the Lions Club and the KCs and things like that, they're seeking that generativity to stay involved in the world. The midlife transition is a period of middle adulthood when people and perspectives change in a major way. Many people experience midlife transition around ages 40 to 45. So oftentimes what this will be is somebody suddenly realize, holy crap, I don't want to do this anymore. They've been working in their field for 10 or 20 years, and they switch careers. Midlife transition can trigger a second period of reassessment known as a midlife crisis. Journalist Gail Sheehy calls the years from 40 to 65 the age of mastery. And by that, I mean that the age of mastery is that time when you are the one that everybody looks to for the answers. Even no matter what your job is, everybody knows you're the guy that knows what's going on because you've been around. The term middlescence is sometimes described as a period of searching that can resemble adolescence. Middlescence can involve a search for a second adulthood. So oftentimes this is where you see the guy goes out and he buys a sports car, and women do it too, but it's more famously it's been the men, because women are usually raising, have the children. But, they'll go out and they'll buy the sports car, or they'll suddenly get really fit at the gym and they'll start doing things. They'll buy their Harley or whatever and go biking around the countryside. Lots of things like that. And so it's sort of like when teenagers are first trying out different roles, where they dye their hair and they get wild, and then other times they, settle down. And it's all that kind of thing. And so that's why it's similar to adolescence, except for it's with older folks. And according to Eric Erickson, the focus of these developmental tasks is improving the quality of one's life and strengthening your relationships, both personal and in the community. Helping one's children make the transition from home life to the outside world. These people who are in middle adulthood, that's when their children are in high school, so most of your parents are in this stage, and they're getting ready to go to college. Okay, so you're trying to help them make that jump from home to the adulthood. It's also when you become the master in your career. You're the one that's going to be the guy that trains other people and is the expert. It's when you're making decisions about how to spend one's second adulthood is an important feature. And then this is where you start to pursue your passions. It might be where you get really serious about your hobbies, that kind of thing. And oftentimes it's you're forced to deal with aging parents, and you get caught in what's known as the sandwich generation. Sandwich generation is people who have to take care of children, and yet they still have to take care of their parents who are getting so old that they can't take care of themselves. And I'm kind of in that position right now. It's not my children that I'm really involved with so much as it's my grandchildren. We take a lot of parenthood responsibilities in that way, though we don't raise them. It's just, but we're involved. And so we have to take care of the grandchildren, and we also have to take care of my wife's parents, who were fairly old, in their late 80s. Baby boomers is a group of people that were born after 1945. There was this big boom. The soldiers came home from the war, and they all had children, and so there was this big group of children born after a few years of not having many children. And as a result, there's a surge, and every time the baby boomers reached a particular period, that became the dominant group. They had a huge impact on the economy. They were the largest group of consumers, potential future of burden on Social Security and on society, and that kind of thing. And so they're a big influence. Now the problem is that there's so many baby boomers, there may not be enough working age people to make sure that they're taken care of with Social Security. And so this too is a problem. The Boomerang Generation, on the other hand, are people closer to your age, and often these are folks who go off, they go to college, and they get their degrees, but they have student loans, other debts, or they have trouble finding work because the economy is not so good, and they end up living at home, and so they end up living at home, and they're with their parents, and so they're often referred to as kid adults because of the fact that they're still having many of the same relationship issues they did when they lived at home before. It usually isn't as bad because of the fact that they're older. So impact on the parents tends to be positive, however, because it creates a close relationship. At this point, children tend to take on more responsibility than they did when they were children. The downside of it for the children is that they often feel a lack of independence, and because they have to live at home. Empty nest syndrome is the syndrome that is applied to parents who have raised their children and now they have left home and gone off and got their own apartment or house or whatever and living on their own. Once the nest is empty, however, many people report positive changes in their life. At first, it's an empty feeling because it's that change where they don't know what to do with themselves, but now it improves. For women, menopause becomes a serious issue in the 40s and 50s. It marks the end of the period of where they menstruate every month. Menopause is normal and can be healthy development in women's lives. There are a number of myths surrounding menopause. After menopause, women need estrogen replacement therapy is not true. They might, but some estrogen is still produced by the body, and women should begin estrogen replacement therapy with caution because they don't necessarily need it. Because there's a lot of health risks involved with taking supplements. Menopause is accompanied by depression and anxiety. Nope, this too is a myth. There are hormonal changes that can affect a woman's body, but oftentimes they adjust just fine. And another myth is that menopause suffer crippling hot flashes. This is not necessarily true. All women do get hot flashes, however, not always that severe. And often there are things you can do to mitigate those hot flashes. Menopause ends a woman's sex drive is not true. In fact, many women feel renewal of sexual interest because they no longer have the burden of worrying about getting pregnant, and so therefore they have active sex lives. So that's not necessarily an issue either. Women's general level of activity is lower after menopause. This isn't true because many women report having energy after menopause, and in fact, many become much more active because they don't have children. They don't have as much childhood responsibilities, child caring responsibilities. Late adulthood is regular exercise and healthy diet can help older adults reduce the impact of physical changes they undergo. People age as their cells age and begin to malfunction. Cognitive changes, including memory decline, occur in late adulthood, but most older adults do quite well intellectually. Aging involves social changes that involve work, family, and living arrangements. Older adults who age successfully continue to believe that life is meaningful and full. So in this section, the ideas about late adulthood is a time of many changes, physical, cognitive, and social. The ways in which older adults handle all these changes can determine how successfully they age. So at the end of this section, you should be able to explain what physical changes are part of late adulthood, why do people age, and what cognitive changes occur in late adulthood. How do social changes affect older adults, and how can older adults age successfully? So the physical changes are age 65 marks the beginning of late adulthood. I'm getting there. I'm almost there. Many physical changes take place in late adulthood. Some physical changes cause health problems. Older adults can do many things to maintain their health, strength, and energy. Regular exercise and healthful diet can help older adults feel better and help them fight disease. Now, one of the theories about aging is that the program theories. The developmental theories that maintain aging as the result of genetics is called program theories. These theories suggest that people and genetics play a significant role in the length of one's life. The other theory is cellular damage theories. It suggests that cells malfunction as a result of damage, not heredity. I've been out in the sun too long, so now my senses, because I've been out in the sun for 60 years, it causes my skin to wrinkle. Some of the scientists blame free radicals or unstable molecules in our bodies for damage. The body doesn't, because of your age, it doesn't rebound as quickly. Cross-linking be another cause of aging. Dementia is a serious loss of cognitive function. People with dementia have major losses in memory and may have speech and or motor problems. Dementia that occurs after the age of 65 is called senile dementia. And most people don't get dementia until they are over 80 years old. Alzheimer's disease is a progressive form of mental deterioration that affects about 10% of people over the age of 65, and nearly half of those over the age of 85. It is a disease and not a normal part of aging. Alzheimer's is a really bad thing. The myth about Alzheimer's is only older adults can get it. It's not true. It can happen as early 30s, 40s, and 50s, and I actually know someone who died of it when he was 47. Alzheimer's typically takes about 10 years to kill you. Contact with aluminum cans and cookware was at one time thought to be a really big cause of Alzheimer's. There doesn't appear to be any, with years of research, there doesn't appear to be a significant link there. Flu shots increase the risk of Alzheimer's. Yeah, the anti-vaxxers are out there trying to use this one too. Alzheimer's can be treated and cured. Medication can slow the progression of the disease for a time, but there's no treatment for a cure or cure for Alzheimer's. Unfortunately, Alzheimer's is considered a fatal disease, but like I say, it can take as long as 10 years to kill you typically. Vascular dementia is a little bit different. Vascular dementia is another kind of dementia. It's caused by a stroke or by a decrease in the blood supply to the brain. Oftentimes, what happens is you have a heart attack or a stroke, and caused by a clot in the jugular vein, and it oftentimes can cause problems. Sometimes it's just one of the veins in the brain itself. Such a decrease happens when fatty deposits collect in the blood vessels that go to the brain. Retirement can be voluntary or compulsory. It used to be they made people retire at 65, and now they're pushing it towards 70 years old. Your generation will not be able to retire till you're 70. People who retire from full-time work sometimes continue working part-time, either paid or voluntary. That's why you see like the old folks working as greeters or doing other kinds of jobs at retail establishments. Grandparenthood is often a lot more fun than parenthood because, as the joke goes, you get to have all the fun of kids, but you don't have to keep them. You can send them home. Grandparents often have more relaxed relationships with their grandchildren than they had with their children. And in part, this is because sometimes you realize, well, that's just the way it is because you've been a parent before. And sometimes it's because you realize, well, maybe I wasn't such a good parent. I should do something different. Or, maybe your kids have it together and you have good kids. Increasing numbers of grandparents, however, take on a major responsibility for raising their grandchildren, and that's one of the things my wife and I do is we play a very important role in taking care of my grandson while his mother's at work. His mother and father are at work. Some Americans have stereotypes about older people's living arrangements. One stereotype portrays older people living with their children, and another has them in a nursing home and other institutions. Yet another says they buy condominiums or move to retirement communities in warmer climates. All of these things are possible, and all of these things do happen. But most people, older people, just live regular lives and live independently in their own homes. I used to have a neighbor when I lived in Cary who lived to be 108 years old, and her son was like 94, and the two of them lived. No, she wouldn't. His son would have been 84, and they lived together in the house for a long time, and then finally. One of the two or both of them passed, and so now their nice big piece of land that they had in the center of Cary is now a big apartment complex. But anyway, many are financially independent, own their own homes. They remain in their hometowns. 30% of older people will spend some time in a nursing home. Which, that's not very many when you think about it, only 30%. But people living in nursing homes usually are over 80 years old. And I can speak from personal experience that once folks hit 80 years old, the change in their abilities really becomes quite dramatic, and you see it happen quite quickly after they turn 80 years old. My mother died at 84, and so there you go. Eric Erickson believed that one challenge facing people in the late adulthood is to maintain their ego integrity. This is a real problem, the belief that the life is meaningful and worthwhile, and even when physical abilities are not what they used to be. It's hard to, if you've always been an active, independent individual, to have to accept help from other people. And oftentimes, as you get older, this becomes necessary. Most people in their 70s report satisfaction in their life, and there's a correlation between socioeconomic status and health, and older people benefit from the social support and feelings and personal well-being. Reshaping one's life to focus on what's important is a component of successful aging. Oftentimes, this is why these folks really get involved in their church and things like that. They're seeking for meaning in life and for social connections, and without work, this is often one of those places where they can achieve those things. Most older people actually have a positive outlook, and it's another component of successful aging. Those that have that positive outlook tend to do much better. Self-challenge, another component of successful aging, is challenging oneself. The formula is simple. It can be used by everyone and includes increasing participation in activities. And like I said, this is where, belonging to a social organization like a church or some other kind of men's club or, gardening club or something like that. Making some close friends, visiting with family, and spending quiet time reading, listening to music, and whatnot. The developmental tasks that you have once you reach late adulthood is adjusting to the physical changes in keeping or becoming physically active, maintain concern about other people so that one does not become preoccupied with one's own physical changes, shifting interest from work to retirement or leisure activity, adjusting to changes in financial status, establishing fulfilling living arrangements, and learning to live with one's husband or wife in retirement. This oftentimes can be a real challenge because you've been married for 40 years, but you never really spent any time together other than, nights and weekends, and now you're together almost 24 hours, and it can be a real challenge sometimes. Adjusting to the illness or death of one's husband or wife is also considered to be one of the worst things that can happen to you. Actually, they in the grief scale, they usually rate the loss of a spouse as even greater than the loss of a child. Living in the moment, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? With your future stretching far into the distance, you probably have plenty of ideas. But suppose you didn't have much time. How would your priorities change, and how would you make the most of the time you have left? There are questions that those in late adulthood have to consider. So those of us who are getting on in years have to start thinking about these things. The theory of socio-emotional selectivity holds that our perception of time plays an important role in the types of goals we set. As young adults, we tend to set long-term goals. Older adults tend to set short-term goals. They also begin to restrict their social network. So they start closing in. I don't need a big network of people because I can only manage so much in my life, is what, when you get older. And, when you can't plan for that big trip around the world in 10 years because, you may not be in the good enough health to do it 10 years down the line. So you plan on a shorter, more practical basis. Older adults become better at controlling their emotions. They've had more experience. They've had more life experience. And so they understand it's usually not the first time they've seen a particular situation. Many older adults want to live in the moment. They want to be happy because it's a good thing that's going on right now. Section 4, death and dying. As much as Christie's theory states that the stages of dying include denial, anger, depression, and acceptance. Dying people need support and relief from pain in a dignified end. Funerals help the living celebrate life of the deceased and cope with sadness. So in this section, this death and dying section, we're going to talk about the final stage of life. People deserve to die with dignity and support of those who love them. After someone dies, the living often depends on the religious beliefs and traditional customs to cope with their sadness. So at this section, we're going to talk about the stages of dying. How can people help a loved one die with dignity, and how do you deal with death? Psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross theorized that there were 5 stages through which those who are dying tend to pass. The stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And these also apply to many major life changes as well. These same stages of grief. Kubler-Ross's theory has met considerable criticism, however. Edmund Scheinman has not found that the feelings about dying follow a particular sequence. Another problem is the theory may tempt people to ignore the uniqueness of each individual's end-of-life experience. Dying people need to feel cared for and supported. They may also need a relief from pain. Dying people need security, self-confidence, and dignity. The hospice alternative, some people dying at a hospice is a home-like place where dying people and their families receive physical and emotional support to help them cope with terminal illness. Typically, people who end up in hospice are only there for a couple of weeks at the most. Most of the time, they're ready to go when they enter hospice. Euthanasia, on the other hand, is illegal in most states. Euthanasia is usually what we do to our pets, where our dog gets to be too old and is having all sorts of health problems, and so you take them to the veterinarian and you put them down. Well, it's typically not legal to do that with people in the United States. However, there are some states where physician-assisted suicide is allowed. However, there are many people who support making it legal with clear restrictions. Others argue that one has the right to take a life, even no one has the right to take a life, even if it is your own. Physician-assisted suicide is legal in some countries under some circumstances. Some of those countries are Canada, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Colombia, Switzerland, and there are parts in the United States, Australia, and Victoria. I guess that must be the last one. Nope, there it is. Living well. Many people write living wills, which are legal documents in which a person requests to be allowed to die rather than kept alive. Artificial means if disabled beyond reasonable expectation or recovery. So somebody might have a living will that says that if I need to be put on a life support system, I don't want that. And so that becomes a way that doctors can allow you to pass. The funeral is a traditional way to acknowledge that a member of the community has died. Funerals reflect typically the religious beliefs or cultural practices of the person. Funerals are a way of saying goodbye to the deceased. They provide a way to remember and celebrate the person's life of the deceased. Funerals tend to provide comfort and aid to the living, and has more to do with the living than it does the deceased. So people who are bereaved are mourning over the person they have lost. Bereaved people may feel sadness, loneliness, anger, numbness, and even relief. Most bereaved people eventually recover from their loss. And like I say, that when someone passes, we oftentimes this makes us feel better because it gives us the closure that we may not have been able to have. Cultural perspectives on grief and death. People everywhere grieve when a loved one dies. However, the form their grief takes and rituals people observe in the face of death vary from culture to culture. To a great extent, our culture shapes us and the way we look at the world. The way we express grief and respond to death is no less a product of the culture. Mexicans celebrate the Day of the Dead every November. According to some traditional African religions, the dead are believed to continue their existence in the spirit world, where they have the power to help or harm the living. Chinese funeral customs involve lengthy services that can last up to 49 days. The traditional Jewish funeral include a simple burial ceremony following a 7-day period of mourning, which they called sitting Shiva. So as you can see. So that concludes our discussion on adulthood. We've taken you all the way from, in chapter 10, from early infancy to old age, death, and dying. And so we look forward to moving on to the next topic, which is will be chapter 13. Thank you for joining us.